guess who's back? Back again. Rachel Maddow's back. Tell a friend, because she will be returning to MSNBC 5 nights a week for the first 100 days of Trump's administration.
Can't you just sense Robby's excitement? Now, after that, Maddow will go back to hosting only on Mondays after April 30th, and Alex Wagner will take over from there. Maddow spoke to USA Today about the new move. She said, "Things are going to change. We're already seeing the freneticism of the Trump news cycle taking over, even during the transition. We're seeing the unpredictable cadence of the way news breaks, as opposed to a more competent, rational administration. So we'll see. We're trying to be ready for anything, and that's part of why we're making this change for the first 100 days.
MSNBC's ratings had been plummeting since Trump's win in November.
Compared to Maddow's November and December average, however, the network said the show's audience last Monday was up 20%.
Investigative reporter at the Washington Free Beacon, Chuck Ross, wrote on X, "First, Jen Rubin quits WAPO, and now Rachel Maddow announces she will work 5 days a week instead of her usual one. A great day for democracy." Post-millennial editor-in-chief Libby Emmons says, "Whatever did we do for MSNBC to give us such a gift?" And in other media news, the Washington Post readership has declined by almost 90% from 2021 to 2024, according to internal data shared with Semaphore. In January 2021, the Post had 22.5 million readers. By mid-2024, that number cratered to around 3 million. The Washington Post also laid off about 100 staffers last week.
Vox was another media outlet that also laid off employees last week.
So let's start with the Maddow of it, and then I have some thoughts on those abysmal numbers for WAPO and Vox.
Well, I would be a defender of Rachel Maddow. We began today's show with a conversation with Jennifer Rubin, of whom I am not a fan. And Jennifer Rubin and Rachel Maddow have, I suppose, broadly similar views. And I would defend Maddow on the basis that I think she authentically believes what she says. I don't think she is a fraud or a grifter. I think that lots of people will disagree with what she says. I'm not attributing those qualities to Jen Rubin either, incidentally. I just find the way she has transformed herself kind of off-putting. But in Maddow's case, look, she is a progressive, liberal voice. She has been one now for many years on MSNBC. She's clearly their biggest draw by far in the ratings. The ratings go down when she's not on. None of the other shows around her can make up that deficit. She did sign a new contract previously, and it allowed her to have this reduced schedule of one night a week where she gets to work on podcasts and other things. I'm not going to say I watch her show every night, even when she is on 5 nights a week. I don't, but good luck to her.
Yeah, I think this is a good business decision for MSNBC. I mean, it's really on her terms. I'm sure they would like her to regularly work every night because she is the network's biggest draw. It's her choice to work less, and she gets sick of doing it, and I actually find that very humanizing and appreciate it about her. I agree that she's talented. I've had a lot of, and I similarly would not put her in the same category as Jen Rubin. I've had a lot of disagreements with her, particularly relating to, I think she exaggerated and overhyped the Russia stuff considerably. Her show had at the fever pitch of that, a sort of inevitability to the criminal charges of Trump for Russia stuff, that if you watched, it was like watching some thriller, and a lot of that did not materialize, and again, I would argue was not that the Russians didn't try to interfere, but it was exaggerated the level of Russian influence actually mattering in terms of how it went down. That's not a criticism unique to me, though. A lot of people have had that to say. A lot of left people have had that to say.
Well, exactly. I mean, just to break in on that point, Matt Taibbi sometimes I agree with and sometimes I disagree with quite strongly, but my recollection is that Taibbi was actually very good on that issue and calling out not just her, but voices on the left generally who had sort of overhyped the Russia stuff. And, he did that from the perspective of someone who certainly at one point would have been very much identified himself with a more progressive stance.
Yes, Glenn Greenwald as well. All right, let's move on to just the greater chaos in the media sphere. So look,
those post numbers are terrible.
They're terrible. Yeah. Now the framing is, this is what happens after you don't endorse Kamala Harris and you tick off all your liberal readers. But this collapse was happening well before that. What I guess that we're seeing reflected here is something you and I have talked about privately, and also probably on on camera as well, the Facebook change, the Facebook of it all. From 2010 to 2019, 2020-ish, Facebook was a massive driver of web traffic to the news websites themselves. A link would go viral on the news feed, and that would actually send readers back to the website itself. So it was really good for traffic for places like the Washington Post, the New York Times, probably the Hill.com as well. I didn't work here in that time period. This is something that everybody in media has experienced, a drop-off in social media-derived traffic that has impacted that distribution model and has caused media companies to look at things like, how do we grow on YouTube? Right. How do we host native video on the site? So there's lots of different strategies that we've adapted as a result of that. So that's probably what you're seeing. Now, those are particularly bad numbers, but I know there are conservative sites that lost like 90% of their traffic from 2018 to now for similar reasons.
Right. I think Breitbart, I seem to recall, having a very, very precipitous drop in traffic. But look, it is pretty catastrophic for any news organization to lose 90% of its readers. I would agree that Facebook is certainly part of that. But it has to be, I think, a broader problem. Now, of course, there is always the phenomenon where news organizations in any form of media gain when there is very dramatic news and lose when the news becomes less dramatic. And some of those Washington Post figures, I think, the high point was from, I believe, January 2021, which was January the 6th and all of that, a real crisis moment in America, and we have different perspectives on it, but it plainly drove a lot of news interest.
Well, and the COVID news bump, everybody being forced to stay at home, and also people just searching for information on an epidemic, things we all learn a lot more about epidemiology. I mean, like all of us as human beings on the earth than we knew 5 years ago. There was just a boost in news topics that I think the post-Facebook collapse of news would have happened much more rapidly, except for this unique confluence of global events, global and American events, that caused a real boost in news interest that masked some of how the social media collapse was really going to change the industry.
Sure, and I do think, although I respect a lot of the reporting the Post does, but I do also think it moved a few notches further than, say, the New York Times did in terms of Trump, not exactly trolling, but headlines and stories that were plainly tailored to appeal to an anti-Trump audience. And then he wasn't the president anymore, and the salience of that, or the usefulness of that, obviously declined. Now, I'm not saying that's why they lost 90% of their readership. That obviously has a multiplicity of causes. But, much as CNN on the TV side had done a somewhat similar thing under the Jeff Zucker regime, it had become sort of somewhat trollish and then had to recalibrate from that. So, look, I think the Post is still a great American journalistic institution. I would not like to see it be in really dire straits, but those numbers are very bad.
Yeah. These are also just gigantic organizations. I mean, you can cut 100 people and there's still like a lot of people left to continue the business of running the newspaper. I mean, that shows that these massive media companies really grew during good times, and then are in a difficult situation of having so many employees and no longer having the revenue to justify those circumstances.
Not a lean and mean machine.
Exactly. Right. Not like us. Well, we've got a lot more to get into today. Up next, we're taking a page out of Niall's notebook, finding out what he has to say is Biden's biggest failure. I have a guess for what it is, but I'm going to find out too. Stay tuned.